So first of all, I want to thank the organizers for allowing me to share my ideas with this important audience. I want to make just 2 points in about 10 minutes, because I want to leave a lot of time for questions and comments. That's, of course, the most interesting thing for the speakers. But before I get going, I want to apologize that I'm not a Cyprus expert. And what I'm going to be talking about is Trump and tariffs and the European Union as a whole, not just Cyprus, a more general discussion. So let me get started with this. First of all, Joan, I hope you don't mind, I'm advertising my book here.
No, I don't mind.
This is a book I wrote in May. You can download it for free. There's a scan code. Well, John, you didn't think I wouldn't advertise my book, did you? Okay. And it's called The Great Trade Hack. And at that time, I was trying to explain what Donald Trump was doing. In particular, I wanted to make the point that what he was doing had nothing to do with how we traditionally think about trade policy. And it was entirely unrelated to what he did in his first term. Normally, trade policy is about a particular dispute in a particular sector with a particular country. And people put on tariffs, and there's retaliations, there's wars. I was in the White House of George Bush Sr. when the US had its last trade war with Japan. I've seen these things going back and forth on sectors. But on April 2nd, what Donald Trump did was declare trade war on every country in the entire world on all sectors. He broke, with one signature, all the promises America had ever made in any agreement, in any setting, everywhere. That was the great trade hack. Now, what I want to do in the first point is explain why he did that. And to argue, I think, that most people are misthinking what's driving Donald Trump's trade policy. And when you want to think about how should I react to what somebody's doing, you have to understand why they're doing it. And if you misunderstand why they're doing it, you're going to make mistakes in your strategic reaction. Here, I'm going to start with this. We are misthinking President Trump's motives. Now, I am an economist, so I could fill the whole thing with equations and charts, but my experience in this kind of setting is it doesn't work. And also, my wife has a small communication agency, and she's told me that if you can take your ideas and put them in a graphic, that means you actually understand those ideas. And because you understand them, it's easier to communicate. So I'm going to go for a kind of cartoon presentation, but please don't think I'm taking this lightly. Here we go. Why were Trumpian tariffs imposed? It's a story. It starts out, the 1990s economic shocks. Workers in America, but all over the world, were competing with China abroad and robots at home. And you can see jobs moved overseas, unhappy. Automation leads to layoff, unhappy. Pain, humiliation, and anger, especially in the United States, but also to the UK to a certain extent, but many advanced economies. Without government help to adjust, middle class became the forgotten men and women, and middle class anger builds. That was especially amplified with the global financial crisis, when this anger turned into a sense of victimhood. Because the banks got bailed out when middle-class Americans lost their house. The car companies were bailed out, but the workers were not. A sense that the elite was running it in a way that was allowing them to get rich on the back of the middle class was getting hurt. That was a narrative that started, and already in Obama's time, he started being very hesitant about trade because of that narrative. Populist promise. Trump channels their pain into a political movement, turning victimhood into trade policy. That led to what I call the grievance doctrine. What is the grievance doctrine? There's a myth behind the grievance doctrine that's driving Donald Trump's trade policy. America played by the rules. There's the happy, honest USA, shaking hands with the foreigners who have knives behind the back. America played by the rules and got played, humiliated, and ripped off. Now, the myth comes with a mandate to stop the steal. It's payback time, tariffs as vengeance. And here you can see the savior, retribution, the bill is paid. Now, I firmly believe that that's how Donald Trump is thinking about the tariffs and wants America to view the tariffs as retribution, as a way of striking back against the globalist elite who got rich on the back of Americans. Now, in that world, breaking all the rules is not a bug. That's a feature, because you see traitorous American elite were in on this, writing rules and signing trade agreements that were bad for America but good for the elite. So when he breaks every single rule, that's part of the vengeance. He has a moral obligation not to follow those rules because they were set up by the globalist elite that was causing the problem in America. This is not traditional trade policy. I've been following trade policy for 40 years, including during the last US-Japan trade war. These words, which he used when he introduced the tariffs, I have never heard any serious person use when talking about trade policy. Talking about war crimes, okay. But this is how he was talking about the tariffs. And these words are strong. I'm sorry, it's embarrassing even for me to say them. And I think most people, when they saw them, just ignored them because they couldn't believe this was his motive. But believe me, it is. He said, and I quote President Trump, "For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friends and foe alike. Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but this is not going to happen anymore." He wasn't talking about military action. He was talking about putting tariffs on. So this thinking about tariffs as if they were trade policy, trying to promote industry or redistribute income or change the balance of trade, that's not what is in his mind. Now, I want to make this point with one more set of cartoons, if you permit. Is that, Madam Chairman, is that okay? One more cartoon?
Yeah, although we're out of time on this one.
On this bit. Okay, it's a good one, though.
But okay, let's see it.
Okay. He's not playing the game we think he is. So here's the media and the Economist. He's losing 40 love again. They think he's playing tennis, but he's actually at the Trump golf tournament. So he's playing golf and thinking he's getting a hole in one, and the media keeps going, "That's chaotic, it's self-defeating, it's ridiculous. What's he doing?" It's because they think he's playing tennis when he's actually playing golf. So, EU's next step. I'll go through this very quickly, Joan. Sorry about that. Patience and diligence. The tariffs are hurting his base, and he's worried about midterm elections. He's holding off and backing down on some tariffs, which I predicted a couple weeks ago, on fentanyl, for example. Remember, he's not playing trade policy. There's a kind of moving carousel of, oh, it's about reindustrialization, it's about the trade balance, it's about helping the middle class. None of that's true. None of it's written down. There are no goals, there are no deadlines. He's playing populism, but he chose a tool that hurt his base. Conclusion, just wait him out. He'll find other ways to thrill his base. We have seen peak Trump tariffs. Now, of course, he'll continue to torture small countries and niche markets with tariffs. He just loves them. But the idea of raising tariffs like he did in April, I think that's over, and I think he's going to have to bring them down or he'll have a big problem with cost of living problems. So Europe has supply chain leverage to force U.S. tariff climb down, just like China did. The U.S. is almost as dependent upon EU industrial inputs as they are on Chinese industrial inputs, but they can't because of the military security dependence on. So before Europe gets its military and security dependence reinforced, they can defend the rules-based world system simply by defending the rules. Remember, the US is only 15% of all world trade, and so if the other 85% follow the rules, we'll be good to go. And I'll stop right there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. I guess, a lot of people are saying, that Trump's got this tariffs on the brain, tariff mania, so it's good to hear your take on, what's behind that, what's driving it. But anyway, we're living with it now, and so it's good to talk about what the fallout, what you expect, what we're already seeing, the fallout, obviously. So, just more in kind of overall global, Europe especially, hit to Europe, what do you see as the main impact? So is it more about the uncertainty? We've got a bit more certainty now. We know what we kind of know what's happening. But that's already had quite a big impact, I guess. Is the impact more in terms of, pullback from investment and spending by both firms and households? Is that the main kind of impact? Or is it the impact on global manufacturing, which is not doing very well as a consequence, but actually global services seem to be doing quite good? Are we seeing winners and losers? Because we're seeing big losers who've been hit, with the tariffs, but there's some beneficiaries of that as well. So how do you see, what's the picture in terms of the economic fallout?
Thanks for that. So I'm going to focus on the economic aspects, especially trade aspects.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest one is what our dinner speaker last night was talking about, the erosion of the U.S. Standing and the fact that nobody can trust them anymore. That's the huge thing going on. But let's go to trade. I would say it looks like this. The U.S. is becoming a more closed economy. The rest of the world is moving on. The U.S., as I wrote a Factful Friday column on LinkedIn, and if you look at the facts, the U.S. share of world exports has fallen below what it was, and its share of imports has fallen. So the U.S. is becoming a more closed economy. But the rest of the world is signing lots of trade agreements, and world trade exports are actually up.
Yes.
So what we've had is that this deflection of trade out of the American market has led to political pressure in countries, including the EU, to sign deals that they were found too politically difficult. So the rest of the world is opening up. And if you want my grand vision of how it's all going to end up, we're going to end up with WTO 2.0 based on mega regional trade agreements like the CPTPP, where many people join these things and through those rules become the global rules. So we'll see essentially a reforming of trade liberalization, a reignition of globalization with America outside.
Okay. Well, this was kind of my next question, because I was going to make the point that, tariffs are not the only trade story. There is another trade story, and that's this interest in new FTAs, free trade agreements, and UK-India. We've had the EU-Mercosur and so on. So are you saying that you think that the medium-term impact, especially for Europe, of US tariffs, it's going to be a robust diversification of European exports to other markets? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I want to ask you then more about WTO 2.0. But
Well, let me just spin out that when you put up tariffs this high, some firms are absolutely devastated, but economies not. So if you were trying to sell specialty steel to the United States, a 50% tariff just destroys everything, especially if you depended upon them. But overall, Europe is not that dependent upon the U.S. market.
Yeah. Well, that seems quite rosy to me, what you just said about WTO 2.0 and a reignition of an era of globalization, because everything else that we're watching really looks like the winds are blowing in the opposite direction. And my question was actually going to be, is there not a much bigger problem than Trump, in that what we're seeing, not just with Trump, but everywhere, is an increasing conflation of kind of security policy and commercial policy, meaning that, what we're seeing increasingly for a long time now in Europe too is governments embracing industrial policies, increasing government deficits, using tools, including non-tariff barriers, which have proliferated over the past 10 years. So we're seeing this kind of generalized turn to protectionism, which is actually a feature of the world in which we're living in, which is, increasingly rivalries, economic rivalries are taking this kind of protectionist form. So yes, he's Trump is the, king of tariffs, but there's a lot more stuff going on than that. And so the world seems to be moving in that direction anyway, not towards a new era of globalization. I'm not saying globalization's finished. I don't think it will finish. The old and new will coexist.
Right. Well, so I'm an incurable optimist. So let me tell the optimistic story. So first of all, what you're talking about, I think, is true. Trade has been weaponized, and that's not changing. The U.S. administration, the next one, will not roll back all these tariffs. I can't imagine a Democratic candidate for presidency in 2028 saying, oh, all those tariff stuff, no, let's go back to signing trade agreements with low-wage countries. That's a bipartisan consensus to blame foreigners for American middle class. And China also likes this weaponization of trade, which Trump has invited them to put in with their export controls, because it gives them leverage over almost everything, over almost everybody. And that I don't now once China and the United States have weaponized their trade, people have to react defensively, like with anti-coercion. So essentially, we've moved from a world where trade and investment was essentially safe, where it's made sense that the high-end chips of the world were only made in one country, and that country was a likely site of a future war, but where the United States couldn't make its own 5G. That was okay, that was safe. Now we're in a world which is not safe, and people are having to change their attitudes. National security, supply chain independence, that's trade policy wrapped up with national security policy, wrapped up with industrial policy. I think that's there forever. And that's why I wanted to talk about trade, but part of that is to liberalize trade and continue a regionalization, perhaps going back more towards what Biden and Obama were talking about, is making these things safe again.
Okay. Got to have a final question, because I know we've got to move on, because we've got such a tight schedule, which is a shame. I just wanted to ask if anybody from the floor had a question. John, you didn't want to ask. I know he's very keen on this. He's not even listening to me. So let me ask the question.
Sure.
So bringing it all back home, I guess, to the US. I know you want to talk about trade and global and everything, but bringing it back to the US. Of course, we economists, economists are always catastrophizing and, saying, it's all going to be a disaster. And of course, that's what everybody said. And, all the forecasts went right. Every institution's forecast for the US and global economy went down, and they're all coming back up again because actually the US economy, what it tells us, it's not everything is about trade. And the US economy has got a lot of other things going for it, and it's quite resilient. So actually, US growth is going to be stronger than many people thought it would be. So are the chickens going to come home to roost at some point, and when will that happen?
Well, let me make a couple comments on that. So first of all, Trump is a tariff lover, but not a tariff fanatic.
Right.
He's pragmatic.
Yeah.
He repeatedly made outrageously large tariffs,
Yes.
then backed off immediately when somebody actually told him how the world works. Because he does not want to hurt his base. That story means he doesn't want to hurt his base, and that's why I believe he's taking the tariffs off. Also, half of US imports are exempted from the tariffs. Yeah. So the headlines and the actual are totally different. I made this point several weeks ago, but you could just look at Fitch, for example. They have the effect of. So that's the first thing. But on the other hand, I think the US economy is incredibly fragile. So it's being driven by consumer spending, as you've probably seen the estimates. Something like 20% of the top income is doing 50% of the spending. Some people say 10, but I think it's 20%.
Yeah.
And they're feeling good because the stock market is doing so well, at least in part. And the stock market is based on 7 companies and one theme. So one bursting of that bubble could bring the thing down in a relatively spectacular collapse. So that's my pessimism for the day. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's not a robust growth model.
Okay, well, it's great to have this conversation, actually, and really interesting to hear your take on all of it, which I think is, quite a nuanced one. Yeah.
Thank you.
And good to hear that it's we're going to see more rowback maybe on this front.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks
Thank
very
you.
much, Richard.
Thank you very much.